I'm standing at the head table of the most expensive rehearsal dinner I've ever attended, watching my father toast to family and legacy, and I know that in about 90 seconds, I'm going to destroy him. The venue is the Harborview estate, one of ours, actually. Varga Properties owns 12 commercial buildings in this city, and this restored 1920s mansion is the crown jewel. 60 guests in cocktail attire, string quartet in the corner, Tuscan sun setting over the water through floor-to-ceiling windows. My brother Colin's fiancée, Brianna, keeps dabbing her eyes with a monogrammed handkerchief. Everyone's champagne glass is full. The room smells like money and white roses. My father, Robert Varga, stands at the microphone in his custom suit, silver hair perfectly styled, every inch the patriarch. He's talking about family, about how proud he is of Colin, about the importance of building something that lasts, about legacy. His voice has that warm, authoritative rumble that's closed 1,000 deals. People are smiling. My stepmother, Stephanie, gazes up at him adoringly, her hand resting on his arm. And beside me, my date, James Chen, 6'1", impeccable charcoal suit, genuine smile, sets down his wine glass very carefully and shifts slightly in his chair. I can feel the energy coming off him. Coiled, ready. My father's voice changes, becomes even more intimate. You know, this family gathering is the perfect time to celebrate not just Colin and Brianna's future, but the future of Varga Properties itself. He pauses for effect. He's always been good at this, the dramatic pause, the room held in his palm. Elena, sweetheart, could you stand up for a moment? Every head turns toward me, 60 pairs of eyes. I feel my Aunt Clara's curious gaze, my Uncle Tom's polite smile, Brianna's mother's perfectly pleasant expression. I stand slowly, smoothing the navy fabric of my dress, my mother's favorite color. My father signals someone. A server appears with a leather portfolio. He opens it with a flourish, pulls out a document I recognize because he's showed it to me a dozen times over the past 18 months. The transfer agreement. The one that would sign away my 40% stake in the company for a fraction of what it's worth. I know we've talked about this privately, he says, his tone gentle, paternal, reasonable. And I thought, what better place to make it official than here, surrounded by everyone who loves you? Elena, it's time. Colin's starting his new chapter. It's time for you to start yours. Let's finalize this as a family. He holds out a pen. The room is so quiet, I can hear the clink of ice in someone's water glass. This is the moment he's been building toward for 2 years. Public pressure, family witnesses, emotional manipulation wrapped in sentiment. He thinks I'm cornered. He thinks I'm the same grieving, uncertain girl who sat in the lawyer's office 24 months ago, shocked to learn her grandmother left her anything at all. He has no idea what's coming. James stands. He does it smoothly, naturally, and extends his hand across the table toward my father. Robert, he says warmly, I don't think we've been properly introduced. My father's smile doesn't waver. He's confused, maybe slightly irritated that someone's interrupting his moment, but he's too well-trained in politeness to show it. He shakes James's hand. Of course, you're Elena's. James Chen, he says, senior partner at Chen and Associates. I specialize in securities fraud and fiduciary malfeasance. His smile never falters. I'm Ms. Varga's attorney. I watch my father's face. The confusion, the delayed processing, the first flicker of fear. James reaches into his jacket pocket and produces a document. He slides it across the table, past the floral centerpiece, past the half-eaten chocolate torte, right into my father's hand. You're being served, James says pleasantly. This is a lawsuit for fraud, breach of fiduciary duty, and embezzlement, filed this morning in Superior Court. You're also being served with an injunction blocking the proposed sale of Varga Properties to Castellan Development, effective immediately. The room erupts. But to understand how we got here, to understand why I'm about to watch my father's face go from ruddy confidence to ashen shock in front of everyone he's ever wanted to impress, I need to take you back. 2 years, to the day my grandmother died and everything started to fall apart. Maria Varga died on a Tuesday in October, age 84, in the house she bought with her first real paycheck in 1963. I was holding her hand. She'd been in hospice for a week, congestive heart failure, they said, but I think it was also just tiredness. She'd worked every day of her life since she was 14 years old in a village outside Budapest. She'd earned rest. The funeral was enormous. She'd touched a lot of lives, tenants she'd helped through hard times, small business owners she'd given below-market leases to when they were starting out, employees she'd treated like family. My father gave a beautiful eulogy. He talked about her strength, her vision, her generosity. He cried. I think some of those tears were even real. The will reading was the following Monday. I sat in the attorney's office. Not James, this was old Mr. Kowalski, who'd handled my grandmother's estate planning for 30 years, and listened as he read through the bequests. Money to various charities. Her jewelry divided between me and my cousins. The house to my Uncle Tom. And then, to my granddaughter, Elena Marie Varga, I leave my full 40% stake in Varga Properties, LLC, to be transferred immediately upon my death, in recognition of her mother's legacy, and in faith that she will protect what we built. I actually gasped. I couldn't help it. My father went very still beside me. Colin, on his phone in the corner, looked up. Wait, what? Mr. Kowalski adjusted his glasses. Robert, you retain your 40% as the surviving spouse per the original partnership agreement. Colin, you have the 20% from the 2015 gift. Elena now holds 40%. My father's jaw worked. Then he smiled tight, controlled. Of course, Mom was always sentimental about the girls. The girls, like my mother and grandmother, were charming eccentrics, not the women who built everything he was sitting on. I was numb. I barely heard the rest of the meeting. 40%. My grandmother had given me 40% of the family business. The business she and my mother started 39 years ago with a down payment on a rundown 8-unit apartment building on the east side. I'd been 7 years old when they bought that first building. I remember my mother taking me to see it, her architect's plans spread across the hood of our station wagon, showing me where she was going to add a skylight, reconfigure the units, restore the original molding. My grandmother had done the books at the kitchen table every Sunday, reading glasses perched on her nose, adding machine clicking. I'd do my homework beside her, comforted by the rhythm of it. My mother, Anna, met my father in 1988. She was 32, a successful architect and property developer with her mother. He was 33, working sales for a commercial real estate firm, charming and handsome and just unreliable enough to be exciting. They married fast, 6 months after meeting. Maria had reservations, she told me this years later, but Anna was in love. Robert joined the business in 1990, right after the wedding. And I'll give him this, he was good at what he did. Networking, schmoozing investors, closing deals. My mother handled design and renovation. My grandmother handled finance and tenant relations. My father brought in new properties, new opportunities. By the time I was born in 1991, they had 6 buildings. By 2000, they had 11. We were happy, I think. I have memories of the 3 of them at the dinner table, talking about projects, my mother sketching on napkins, my grandmother teasing my father about his ties, my father making them laugh. I remember feeling safe, loved, part of something solid. And then in 2007, my mother found the lump. Stage 3 breast cancer. Aggressive. She fought for 8 months. Chemo, radiation, clinical trials. My grandmother never left her side. My father, he tried. I think he tried. But he wasn't good at sickness, at fear. He spent more time at the office. Said he was keeping things running for when she got better. She didn't get better. She died 6 months after my 19th birthday in the same hospice room where my grandmother would die 16 years later. I was a sophomore in college. My father was 52. My grandmother was 68. The grief was annihilating. My father threw himself into work. My grandmother aged overnight. Her daughter, her partner, her best friend, gone. I went back to school and studied like my life depended on it, because I didn't know what else to do with the howling emptiness inside me. My father remarried 5 years later in 2012. Stephanie was 43, worked in PR, beautiful and polished and nothing like my mother. I tried to be happy for him. My grandmother was polite but distant. I graduated with my MBA in 2013, top of my class in real estate development. My father hired me immediately, VP of acquisitions. I was so proud. I thought I was honoring my mother, stepping into the legacy she and my grandmother built. And for 6 years, I loved it. I was good at it. Property analysis, market trends, tenant retention strategies, development feasibility. I'd inherited my mother's eye for potential and my grandmother's head for numbers. I worked 70-hour weeks. I closed deals. I rebuilt relationships with long-term tenants who'd felt neglected after my mother died. I modernized our management systems. My father would clap me on the shoulder at board meetings, say, "That's my girl," and I'd glow. Colin joined the business in 2016, fresh out of undergrad with a generic business degree and a lot of opinions. My father made him COO within a year. I didn't question it. He was family, and wasn't that what this was about? But after my father married Stephanie, things shifted. Subtly at first, Stephanie started coming to company events, playing hostess. She'd introduce my father as the founder of Varga Properties, not co-founder, not along with his late wife and mother-in-law, just founder. I corrected her once, gently. Actually, my mom and grandmother started the company. Dad joined after he and Mom got married. She'd smiled, brittle. "Well, that's a sweet story, honey, but Robert's the one who really grew it into what it is today." My father hadn't corrected her. Then there were the dinner parties where Stephanie would steer conversation away from me when I talked about projects, redirect to Colin, say things like, "Let the men handle the business talk. Alina, tell us about your love life." The board meetings where my reports started getting shortened for time, while Colin's rambling updates went unchallenged. The slow reassignment of my projects to other people. And then, in 2019, my father called me into his office and suggested I take a step back. "You've been working so hard," he said. "Don't you want time for yourself, to travel, maybe meet someone, start a family?" I was 28 years old. I had no interest in stepping back, but he framed it as concern, as care, and I was so desperate to keep the peace, to not lose the last family I had, that I said okay. Okay to a vague, consulting role. Okay to working from home. Okay to watching Colin take over my projects, my relationships, my role. By the time my grandmother died in 2021, I'd been functionally erased from the company I'd helped build. I'd let it happen. I was so afraid of being alone, of losing my father and brother the way I'd lost my mother, that I made myself small, agreeable, unobtrusive. And my father took my silence as permission to write me out of the story entirely. I checked the company website last month, before all this started. The About Us page has a history section. It says, "Varga Properties was founded in 1982 by Robert Varga, who built the company from a single property into a premier commercial real estate portfolio." My mother's name appears once in the fine print. Early contributor, Anna Varga, 1956-2008. My grandmother isn't mentioned at all. I stared at that screen for 20 minutes, something cold and hard forming in my chest. They'd erased them, erased the women who did the actual work, who took the actual risks, who built the actual foundation. And they'd done it so slowly, so casually, that I hadn't even noticed until it was complete. That's when I started paying attention, really paying attention. Not to what my father said, to what he did. And that's when I started to see the cracks. 6 months after the will reading, my father scheduled a family business meeting. That's what he called it in the calendar invite. Not a board meeting. We were well past the formality of treating me like an actual shareholder. Just a family chat. Casual. Nothing to worry about. It was held in the conference room at our downtown office, the one with the view of the harbor. I arrived to find my father at the head of the table, Colin to his right, and unexpectedly, Stephanie, who had no official role in the company, sitting beside Colin with a legal pad and pen like she was taking minutes. My father smiled when I walked in. "Alina, thanks for coming, coffee." I shook my head, sat down across from them. The configuration felt deliberate, 3 of them on one side, me alone on the other. So, my father said, folding his hands on the table, I wanted to talk about the future of the company. Now that Mom's gone, he paused, appropriately somber. We need to think about structure, sustainability. Colin's taking on more leadership responsibilities, and frankly, sweetheart, I worry about you. Worry about me. I kept my voice neutral. The burden of ownership, Stephanie interjected, her tone syrupy with concern. It's so much stress, Alina. Liability, taxes, all those decisions. Your father and I were talking, and we just think, wouldn't you rather have freedom? Colin was scrolling on his phone, not even pretending to pay attention. My father slid a document across the table. A valuation report from some firm I'd never heard of. Hendricks and Associates, commercial real estate appraisal. We had the company independently valued, he said. Current fair market value is $8 million. I blinked. $8 million. For 12 commercial properties in prime locations. He continued, smooth as ever. Your 40% would be $3.2 million. We'd like to buy you out. Give you liquidity. You could travel, buy a place, invest however you want. No more worrying about board meetings or property management headaches. $3.2 million. It sounded like a lot of money. It was a lot of money, more than I'd ever had in my bank account, enough to live on for years. But something felt wrong. I'd like to see the financials, I said. The actual books, revenue, expenses, property assessments. My father's smile tightened just slightly. Of course you can see them. But Alina, honey, do you really want to dig into all that? You've been out of the day-to-day for a couple years now. It's complex stuff. I have an MBA in real estate finance, Dad. I know. He held up his hands, placating. I just mean, look, Colin and I have been running the operations. We understand the current market conditions, the debt structure, the risk factors. This valuation is fair. More than fair, actually. We're family. I want to take care of you. Stephanie leaned forward. Alina, sweetheart, this is exactly why women need to let the men handle these things. It's too stressful. You don't want to spend your 30s buried in spreadsheets, do you? Don't you want a life? The condescension was so thick I could taste it. Colin finally looked up from his phone. Just take the deal, Elle. It's generous. Dad's trying to help you out. My father's expression shifted, just a degree or two colder. I'm giving you 60 days to think about it, but I need an answer by then. We have opportunities we're exploring, and we need a clear ownership structure. What opportunities? Just preliminary conversations, nothing to worry about. He stood, signaling the meeting was over. Think about it. $3.2 million, Alina, that's a fresh start. I took the valuation report and left. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the number, $8 million. I'd been away from the operational details for 2 years, but I wasn't an idiot. I knew the portfolio. I'd worked on half those acquisitions myself. At 2 a.m, I gave up on sleep, made coffee, and opened my laptop. Property records are public information. Tax assessments are public information. If you know where to look, you can find out a lot. I started with the Riverside building, 12,000 square feet of retail space in the revitalized Arts District. When we'd bought it in 2015, it was half vacant. I'd spent 8 months courting tenants, offering competitive rates to local businesses. By the time I stepped back in 2019, occupancy was at 90%. I pulled the current tenant list from the county records, a boutique coffee roaster, a high-end furniture showroom, and my stomach dropped. A flagship location for Anthea Athletics, a major national athleisure brand. I searched for the Anthea lease. It wasn't public, but the business licenses were. They'd moved in 8 months ago. Draft the documents, I tell Diane. I'll let you know when I'm ready to use them. I cross-referenced with commercial lease comps in the area. A brand like Anthea in that location, that square footage. They were paying at least triple what our previous tenants paid. Maybe more. The Riverside building alone was probably worth $2 million, maybe more. I moved to the next property, the 4th Street development site, 3 vacant lots we'd assembled over a decade. Last I'd checked, it was zoned commercial light, good for maybe a small mixed-use building. I pulled up the zoning map. It had been rezoned. Last year, high-density residential. Those 3 lots, with high-density zoning, in a neighborhood where condos were selling for $800,000. That was a $5 million asset, minimum. My hands were shaking. I went through the whole portfolio, property by property, cross-referencing tax assessments, recent sales comps, zoning changes, tenant improvements. By the time the sun came up, I had a number. Conservative estimate, assuming modest occupancy and no aggressive development. The company was worth at least $20 million. Probably closer to 25. My 40% wasn't worth $3.2 million. It was worth $8 million, maybe 10. I sat back, staring at my spreadsheet, and felt something I hadn't felt in years. Ray. Not the hot, explosive kind, the cold kind, the clarifying kind. My father wasn't trying to buy me out. He was trying to rob me. I called Tasha at 9 a.m. Tasha Rodriguez had been my best friend since business school. She was a CPA now, working for a big firm downtown, terrifyingly competent with numbers and completely intolerant of bullshit. "I need you to look at something," I said when she answered. "Can you meet me?" We met at a coffee shop in Fremont, neutral territory. I brought my laptop and a thumb drive with every financial document I'd been able to access, which wasn't much. My login to the company's shared drive had been deactivated at some point. I hadn't even noticed. But I still had old board packets, historical financials, property files from when I'd actually worked there. Tasha ordered a double espresso and opened her own laptop. I watched her face as she reviewed the files, cross-referenced my napkin math, pulled up her own comps. She went pale. "Alina," she looked up at me, "if they're representing the company value as $8 million when it's actually worth 20 plus, and they're using that false valuation to pressure you to sell your shares, is that illegal?" "It's fraud," she said it flatly. "And if they're doing it as officers and board members of a company where you're a shareholder, it's also breach of fiduciary duty. They have a legal obligation to give you accurate information." My coffee had gone cold. I wrapped my hands around the cup anyway, needing something to hold on to. "What if I'm wrong?" I said quietly. "What if I'm just, I don't know, paranoid, out of touch? What if the valuation is right and I'm the one who doesn't understand?" Tasha reached across the table and gripped my wrist. Hard. "You're not wrong. I've been doing this for 8 years. These numbers don't lie." She paused. "You need a lawyer, not a general practice attorney. Someone who specializes in shareholder disputes, securities fraud, real estate." "I don't even know where to start." "I do." She pulled out her phone, scrolled through contacts. "James Chen. He was my ex-boyfriend's roommate in law school. He's a partner now at his own firm, handles exactly this kind of thing. Corporate malfeasance, fiduciary duty, shareholder oppression. He's expensive, but he's a shark." "Tasha, I can't afford." "A lot of these guys work on contingency for strong cases. And baby, this is a strong case." She was already texting. "Let me reach out, just meet with him. One conversation." I felt like I was standing on the edge of a cliff. "If I do this," I said slowly, "it's going to destroy what's left of my family." Tasha's expression softened, but her voice stayed firm. "Alina, what family? The one where your dad is trying to steal millions from you, where your stepmother tells you you're too stupid to understand business, where your brother can't even look up from his phone long enough to care." I didn't answer. "You have a choice," she said. "You can let them do this to you, take the lowball offer, smile and pretend it's fine, and spend the rest of your life wondering what your mom and grandmother would think of you for giving away what they built. Or you can fight." I thought about my mother's architectural drawings, still in a box in my closet. The careful pencil lines, the notes in her handwriting. "Load-bearing wall, do not remove. Skylight here for natural light. Remember, we're building homes, not just investments." I thought about my grandmother's adding machine, the click-click-click of it at the kitchen table, her reading glasses sliding down her nose, her patient voice explaining cash flow and cap rates to a 10-year-old who probably didn't understand but wanted to be near her. "Make the introduction," I said. James Chen's office was in a sleek high-rise downtown, all glass and steel, and the kind of understated expensive furniture that whispered rather than shouted. He was younger than I'd expected, late 30s maybe. Sharp suit, kind eyes, handshake that was firm without being aggressive. He offered me tea, I accepted, and gestured to a chair across from his desk. "Tasha gave me the overview," he said, opening a legal pad. "But I want to hear it from you, start wherever makes sense." So I told him the whole thing, my mother and grandmother building the company, my father joining later, my mother's death, my slow erasure from the business, the inheritance, the buyout pressure, the fake valuation. He took notes, asked sharp questions. "Do you still have shareholder rights, board access? What does the original operating agreement say about share transfers? Have you received regular financial statements?" When I finished, he sat back and steepled his fingers. "First question," he said. "Are you still listed as a shareholder in the company records?" "I assume so. I got the shares 8 months ago." "Have you received board meeting minutes, financial statements, anything you're entitled to as a 40% owner?" I thought about it. I get emails, board meeting notices, but I haven't opened them in months, maybe a year. I figured since I wasn't working there anymore, they were just courtesy copies. "You're not a courtesy stakeholder, Alina. You own 40% of the company. Legally, you're entitled to full access to financial records, board decisions, strategic plans, everything." He made a note. "Have you tried to access company files recently?" "My login doesn't work anymore." His eyebrow went up. "When did that happen?" "I don't know. Sometime in the last year." "That's a problem for them." He leaned forward. "As a 40% shareholder, denying you access to company information is a breach of fiduciary duty. That's before we even get to the fraudulent valuation." My heart was pounding. So what do I do? First, I send a formal demand letter requesting full financials, board minutes, and operational reports for the last 3 years. They have to comply. When they do, and they will, because the alternative is me filing a motion to compel and them looking even worse. We review everything. If we find what I think we're going to find, we have options. What kind of options? Civil lawsuit for fraud and breach of fiduciary duty. Depending on what the books show, possibly criminal referral for embezzlement or securities fraud. Or, he paused, we could go nuclear. Force a sale of the company or force a buyout of their shares instead of yours, or petition to remove your father as CEO and install independent management. I felt dizzy. This is my father. I know. His voice was gentle but unflinching. That's why I need you to be very sure before we proceed. If we do this, it's going to get ugly. Family doesn't forgive this kind of thing, even when they're the ones who started it. You need to decide if you can live with that. I looked out the window at the city below. Somewhere out there was the first building my mother and grandmother ever bought. The one with the skylight she designed. The one where she taught me that buildings could be beautiful and functional, that business could be personal, that making money and making a difference weren't mutually exclusive. My grandmother left me those shares for a reason, I said quietly. She knew, maybe not the specifics, but she knew my father would try this, and she trusted me to protect what she and my mother built. That's not an answer. I met his eyes. Yes, it is. I can live with my father hatting me. I can't live with betraying my mother and grandmother by letting him steal their legacy. James Chen smiled. It wasn't a warm smile. It was the smile of a predator who'd just been given permission to hunt. Then let's get to work. The demand letter went out 3 days later. My father called me within an hour of receiving it. I didn't answer. He left a voicemail, his voice tight with barely controlled anger. Alina, what the hell is this? You've got lawyers sending me threats. Call me, now. I didn't call. He tried twice more that day. Then Colin texted. What's your problem? Dad's trying to help you and you're being a psycho. I blocked his number. Stephanie sent an email with the subject line, Disappointed, I deleted it without reading. 2 weeks later, James received the financials. Boxes of them. Bank statements, tax returns, property files, board minutes, contracts, everything. He hired a forensic accountant, a woman named Dr. Yuki Tanaka, who had testified in federal fraud cases and had the kind of credentials that made my MBA look like a participation trophy. And then we started digging. It took 6 weeks. What we found was worse than I'd imagined. The fake valuation was just the surface. Robert and Colin had been siphoning company funds for at least 3 years. Consulting fees paid to a shell company called RCS Holdings, which was registered to Stephanie. $200,000 over 3 years for services that were never documented or rendered. Personal expenses run through the company card. A Rolex for Colin's birthday, $28,000. A Tesla for Robert, leased under the company, $1,800 a month. Dinners, travel, a golf club membership, small enough individually that they'd get lost in the operational expenses, but together, over 3 years, nearly $500,000. Then there was the revenue recognition issue. The company's financial statements, the ones presented to our bank for a credit line extension last year, showed projected revenues that didn't match the actual lease agreements on file. They'd inflated the numbers. Not by a lot, just enough to make the company look more profitable, more stable. That's bank fraud. And then, buried in an email chain Colin had been careless enough not to delete, we found it. A letter of intent from Castellan Development Group. They wanted to buy Varga Properties, the whole portfolio, 12 buildings, 3 development sites, everything. Offered price, $22 million. The deal was scheduled to close 90 days from the date of the letter. I checked the date on the letter. Then I checked the date my father had given me to accept his buyout offer. The buyout deadline was 30 days before the Castellan sale would close. If I'd signed, I'd have gotten $3.2 million for shares that were about to be worth $8.8 million in the sale. And I'd have had no say in the sale at all. I sat in James's office, staring at the letter of intent, and something crystallized inside me. This wasn't a family disagreement. This wasn't a misunderstanding or a difference of opinion about my role. This was calculated, deliberate theft. My father was going to steal my inheritance, sell the company my mother and grandmother built, pocket the money, and cut me out entirely. And he was going to do it while smiling and calling me, sweetheart. "We have enough," James said quietly. "Fraud, breach of fiduciary duty, self-dealing, possibly embezzlement. We can file tomorrow. What happens if we win? Depends on the judge and the settlement. Best case, we force your father and brother out, you take control of the company. Middle case, we block the sale, force a fair buyout of their shares instead of yours. Worst case, court-ordered sale of the company and equitable distribution, but at the real value, you'd get your $8.8 million. And my father would face consequences. Civil liability, definitely. Depending on how aggressive the DA is, potentially criminal charges for the bank fraud. I thought about Sunday dinners, about my father teaching me to ride a bike, about him holding my hand at my mother's funeral. Then I thought about him erasing her from the company history, about him looking me in the eye and offering me a third of what I was owed, about him laughing with Colin and Stephanie about how easy it was to manipulate me. "Do it," I said. "File the lawsuit." James nodded, started making notes. Then I had another thought. "Wait," I said. "When's the Castellan deal supposed to close?" He checked the letter. "Looks like 8 weeks from now." "And my brother's wedding." "I have no idea when your brother's getting married, Alina." 6 weeks from now, rehearsal dinner the night before." I met James's eyes. "What if we served him there?" James blinked. "At the rehearsal dinner?" "In front of the whole family. Everyone who's watched him diminish me for years. All the business associates he's been schmoozing. Everyone." "That's incredibly dramatic." "He was going to make me sign away my shares in front of 60 people at a family event," I said. He wanted to use public pressure and sentiment to corner me. I want to return the favor. A slow smile spread across James's face. I'll need to time the filing carefully. And we'd need to serve the injunction blocking the Castellan sale at the same time, or he could try to rush it through. Can you do it? Oh, I can do it. He was already pulling up a calendar. Question is, are you sure? Because once we do this, there's no walking it back. Your family will never forgive you. They already decided I don't matter, I said. I'm just making it official. And that's how we started planning the rehearsal dinner ambush. The plan came together over the next 3 weeks like a legal military operation. James would attend the rehearsal dinner as my plus one. The family had been needling me about being single for months, Stephanie with her pointed questions about whether I was putting myself out there, Colin with his obnoxious jokes about me becoming a cat lady, my father with his concerned looks and suggestions that I needed to build a life outside work, Rich, considering he'd pushed me out of the work. A boyfriend, or someone who looked like a boyfriend, would fit perfectly into their narrative. They'd see what they expected to see. Alina finally moving on, getting a life, maybe even becoming someone's wife instead of someone's business partner. They'd be so busy congratulating themselves on my domestication that they wouldn't see the trap until it snapped shut. James was perfect for the role. Handsome enough to be impressive, polished enough to fit in at an upscale event, charming enough to disarm. And underneath all that, a ruthless legal mind and a briefcase full of documents that would detonate my father's entire plan. We rehearsed it, not the emotional parts, those were real, and I'd have to navigate them in the moment, but the logistics, the timing, the exact sequence of events. James would carry the lawsuit and the injunction in his jacket pocket. The full forensic report would be in his car, along with binders for each board member. We'd have them delivered to the board members' hotel rooms that night, after the confrontation, so they'd have everything they needed for the emergency meeting we'd demand. Because that was the other part of the plan. As a 40% shareholder, I could call an emergency board meeting with 72 hours notice if I had cause. Fraud and breach of fiduciary duty were cause. James had already drafted the demand letter to the board, ready to send the moment we served my father. The board was small, just 5 people. My father, Colin, 2 outside members, Dr. Patricia Acaffer, a retired real estate developer who'd known my grandmother, and Stephen Matsuda, a local business attorney who'd been advising the company for a decade. And technically me, though I'd never been invited to actually attend a meeting since my grandmother died. James had done his homework on Patricia and Stephen. Both had reputations for integrity. Both had, in past board minutes, occasionally pushed back on my father's more aggressive proposals. Stephen had specifically raised questions last year about the consulting fees to RCS Holdings, questions my father had deflected by saying it was for strategic advisory services, and Colin had backed up. If we gave them the evidence, the real financials, the forensic analysis, the proof of self-dealing, James thought they'd vote to remove Robert as CEO. They won't want the liability, he'd explained. The minute they know about the fraud, they become liable too if they don't act. Self-preservation will push them to the right choice. Maybe, or maybe family loyalty and old boys club instincts would win out, and they'd circle the wagons around my father. But at minimum, we'd block the Castellan sale. And we'd do it publicly, in front of witnesses, so my father couldn't spin some story later about me being confused or emotional or manipulated by attorneys. I wanted everyone to see. I spent those 3 weeks preparing in other ways, too. I moved everything that mattered out of my apartment. Photos, my mother's drawings, my grandmother's jewelry, documents, hard drives. I packed it all into boxes and moved it to Tasha's guest room. My lease was in my name. My father had cosigned when I first rented the place, back when I was 25 and didn't have established credit, but I'd long since qualified to have his name removed. Still, I didn't trust him not to show up, not to use some claim of parental concern to try to access my space. I opened a new bank account at a different institution, transferred my savings. I made copies of everything, Every email, every document, every file James and Dr. Tanaka had compiled. One set went into a safe deposit box. One set went to Tasha. One set stayed with James. I told my therapist, whom I'd started seeing after my grandmother died, what was about to happen. She asked me the same question James had. Can you live with the consequences? I'd thought about it for a long time. I don't know, I'd finally said, but I know I can't live with the alternative. She'd nodded. Then that's your answer. I also did something I hadn't expected to do. I reached out to Dr. Patricia Ockeffer. Not to reveal the plan. James had advised against tipping our hand too early, but just to reconnect. I sent her an email. Hi, Dr. Ockeffer. I hope you're well. I've been thinking a lot about my grandmother lately and about the company she and my mother built. I know you were friends with Grandma Maria, and I wondered if you'd be willing to meet for coffee sometime. I'd love to hear your memories of the early days. She responded within a day. Alina, I'd love to. I've been thinking about you, wondering how you're doing. Let's meet next week. We met at a cafe near the university where she used to teach. She was in her 70s now, sharp-eyed and elegant, with silver locks and the kind of presence that made you sit up straighter. We talked about my grandmother, about the first building, the risks Maria and my mother took. Dr. Ockeffer had been one of their early mentors, had helped them navigate financing when banks were less than enthusiastic about lending to women. Your grandmother was the toughest negotiator I ever met, she said, smiling into her tea. And your mother, she had vision. She could see what a property could become, not just what it was. Do you think they'd be proud of what the company is now? I asked. Her smile faded slightly. I think they'd be proud of the portfolio. 12 buildings, 3 development sites, that's an impressive legacy. But, she hesitated. I think they'd be disappointed that their names aren't on it anymore. I didn't tell her what was coming, but I think she saw something in my face because she reached across the table and squeezed my hand. Your grandmother trusted you with those shares for a reason, she said. Don't forget that. When I left, I felt steadier. The final piece was the hardest. I had to tell my daughter. Wait, no, I don't have a daughter. That was the other story, the other outline. I'm Alina. I'm 32 and single, and the closest thing I have to children is my goddaughter, Tasha's 3-year-old. But I did have to face the fact that this was going to hurt people I loved. My Aunt Clara, my father's sister, who'd always been kind to me. My Uncle Tom, my mother's brother, who'd gotten the house in the will and had always spoken gently about his sister. Cousins who had nothing to do with this but would be at the wedding, at the rehearsal dinner. I couldn't warn them. If word got back to my father, he'd act preemptively. Maybe rush the Castellan closing, maybe move assets, maybe do something I couldn't predict. So they'd be collateral damage. I hated that, but I didn't see another choice. 2 days before the rehearsal dinner, my father texted me. Looking forward to Saturday. Heard you're bringing someone's special smiling face with smiling eyes. Someone had told him I'd RSVP'd with a +1. Probably Brianna, who was managing the seating chart and had been texting me increasingly frantic questions about meal preferences and pronouns, and whether my date had any food allergies. I'd kept my responses minimal. His name is James. No allergies, thanks. Brianna had immediately texted back. OMG, finally. Can't wait to meet him. Is it serious? I'd responded, we'll see. My father clearly thought this was a good sign. His texts over the past week had been warmer, more approving. As if me showing up with a man meant I was finally becoming the daughter he wanted. Pliable, focused on relationships instead of business, safely distracted from the company and the shares and the inheritance he was trying to steal. I replied, see you Saturday, smiling face with smiling eyes. James picked me up at 6 on Saturday evening. The rehearsal dinner started at 7. The venue was 20 minutes away. He was in a charcoal suit, crisp white shirt, no tie, the perfect level of formal but approachable for a family event. He looked good. Under different circumstances, in a different life, I might have actually been nervous to introduce him to my family. You ready? he asked as I slid into the passenger seat of his Tesla. I was in the navy dress, my mother's favorite color. I'd had my hair done makeup professional, heels that made me 3 inches taller. I looked polished, put together, like someone who had her life figured out. I didn't feel like that person. No, I said honestly, but let's do it anyway. He smiled. That's the spirit. The drive was quiet. He didn't try to fill the silence with reassurances or pep talks, and I was grateful. There was nothing to say that would make this easier. When we pulled up to the Harborview estate, I felt a sharp pang of loss. This building had been one of my projects. I'd found it, a neglected 1920s mansion that had been carved into offices in the 60s, drop ceilings and fluorescent lights covering up original crown molding and hardwood. I'd spent a year overseeing the restoration, working with architects and historical preservation specialists to bring it back. We'd turned it into an event venue, and it was booked solid every weekend. My father had announced the project at a Chamber of Commerce lunch, took full credit, never mentioned my name. And now Colin was having his rehearsal dinner here, in the building I'd saved, and no one would know or care. James offered me his arm. I took it. We walked in. The main hall was stunning, all exposed brick and Edison lighting and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the harbor. 60 guests mingled with champagne glasses, dressed in cocktail attire. A string quartet played something classical and inoffensive. The tables were set with white linens and those expensive low floral arrangements that cost a fortune and look effortless. My father saw me first. His face lit up, genuine pleasure, which made my stomach twist. Elena, he strode over, pulled me into a hug, then turned to James, extending his hand. You must be the mystery man, Robert Varga. James Chen. James shook his hand, warm and confident. Thanks for including me, beautiful venue. One of our properties, my father said proudly. We restore historical buildings, turn them into something special. This was a labor of love. I dug my fingernails into my palm, said nothing. Stephanie appeared, glass of white wine in hand, and looked James up and down with obvious approval. Well, Elena, you've been holding out on us. James, what do you do? I'm an attorney, James said easily. Corporate law mostly, boring stuff. Oh, a lawyer, Stephanie beamed. Robert, didn't I say Elena needed to meet a professional, someone stable? Colin wandered over, Brianna attached to his arm. She was in a white rehearsal dress, because of course she was, and looked like she'd stepped out of a bridal magazine. Elle, you made it. Colin's joviality was performative, but James wouldn't know that. This the boyfriend. This is James, I said, not confirming or denying the label. Cool, man. Colin shook his hand with the kind of aggressive grip guys use to establish dominance. What kind of law? Mergers and acquisitions, shareholder disputes, fiduciary litigation, James said smoothly. A lot of family business stuff, actually. I watched my father's face, a tiny flicker there and gone. Well, we won't talk shop tonight, Robert said, clapping James on the shoulder. Tonight's about family. Come, let me introduce you around. And just like that, we were absorbed into the event. James was perfect. He charmed my Aunt Clara, asking about her garden. He talked college football with my Uncle Tom. He complimented the event planner, made Brianna laugh, even managed to have a polite conversation with Stephanie about the wine selection. Everyone loved him. I watched him work the room and felt a strange detachment, like I was watching a play I'd already seen. These people had no idea what was about to happen. We were seated at the head table, me, James, my father, Stephanie, Colin, Brianna, and Brianna's parents. I picked at my salmon, drank water, not wine. I needed to stay sharp. James ate normally, made small talk, played his part. Speeches started after dinner. Brianna's father went first, something sentimental about love and partnership. Brianna's maid of honor told embarrassing college stories. Colin gave a rambling toast that was mostly inside jokes and football references. And then my father stood. He tapped his glass, the room quieted. I want to thank everyone for being here tonight, he began, his voice warm and commanding. "Colin and Brianna, seeing you two start this journey, it reminds me what's important. Family, legacy, building something that lasts." He was good at this. The pauses, the eye contact, the way he made everyone feel included. "Varga Properties has been my life's work," he continued. "Building something from the ground up, creating value, serving this community. And now, watching my son step into leadership, take on more responsibility, it makes me so proud." I felt James shift slightly beside me, almost imperceptible. My father's tone changed, became more intimate. "And this family gathering is the perfect time to celebrate not just Colin and Brianna's future, but the future of our company." He signaled someone. A server appeared with a leather portfolio. My heart started pounding. "Elena, sweetheart, could you stand up for a moment?" Every head in the room turned toward me. I stood slowly. My legs felt unsteady. I gripped the edge of the table. My father opened the portfolio, pulled out the transfer agreement. The same one he'd showed me 6 months ago. The one that would sign away my 40% for a fraction of its worth. "I know we've talked about this privately," he said, his voice gentle, paternal. "And I thought, what better place to make it official than here, surrounded by everyone who loves you. Elena, it's time to start your next chapter. Colin's building his future with Brianna. It's time for you to build yours." He held out a pen. "Let's do this as a family." The room was utterly silent, expectant, every eye on me. The old Elena, the one who'd spent 4 years making herself small, swallowing objections, choosing peace over truth, would have felt the crushing weight of that collective gaze and crumbled. But I wasn't her anymore. I looked at James. He set down his wine glass with deliberate care and stood. "Robert," James said, his voice pleasant and clear, "I don't think we've been properly introduced." My father looked momentarily confused. They'd already met, already shaken hands, but his professional grace held. He smiled, extended his hand across the table. James shook it. "James Chen," he said, "senior partner at Chen and Associates. I specialize in securities fraud, breach of fiduciary duty, and shareholder oppression." My father's smile froze. "I'm Ms. Varga's attorney." The room inhaled. James reached into his jacket pocket, the movement smooth, practiced, and produced a folded document. He placed it on the table, slid it across the white linen past the floral centerpiece, past the half-eaten wedding cake, directly into my father's hand. "You're being served," James said, still pleasant, still calm. "This is a lawsuit filed this morning in Superior Court, alleging fraud, breach of fiduciary duty, self-dealing, and embezzlement. You're also being served with an emergency injunction blocking the proposed sale of Varga Properties to Castellan Development Group, effective immediately." Someone gasped. I think it was Brianna. My father stared at the document like it was written in a foreign language. "What?" He looked up at me, and I watched his face cycle through confusion, disbelief, anger. "Elena, what is this?" Colin was on his feet. "What the fuck?" "Language," Stephanie hissed, but she'd gone pale. James continued, addressing the room now, his voice carrying to every corner of the hall. "For those wondering, Ms. Varga is the legal owner of 40% of Varga Properties, LLC, inherited from her grandmother Maria Varga 8 months ago. Over the past 18 months, Mr. Robert Varga and Mr. Colin Varga have engaged in systematic fraud to pressure her into selling those shares at approximately 1/3 of their actual value. We have forensic accounting evidence of financial misrepresentation, self-dealing through shell companies, and undisclosed sale negotiations that would have deprived Ms. Varga of millions of dollars." "This is insane," my father said. His voice was shaking, rage or fear, I couldn't tell. She's having some kind of breakdown, this is." "I'm not," I said quietly. Every head swiveled back to me. "I'm not having a breakdown. I'm not confused. I know exactly what I'm doing." My voice surprised me. It was steady, clear. "You tried to steal from me, Dad. You lied about what the company is worth. You shut me out, erased mom and grandma from the history, and then tried to pressure me into signing away my inheritance for a fraction of its value so you could sell the whole company and pocket the money. That's not, he was sputtering now. I was trying to help you. By lying about the valuation. By paying yourself and Colin through a shell company owned by Stephanie. By negotiating a $22 million sale without telling me. Dr. Patricia Aucaffer, seated 3 tables away, stood up. Robert, is that true? Are you selling the company? My father rounded on her. Patricia, this is a family matter. I'm on the board, she said sharply. A sale is absolutely my business. When were you planning to tell us? Stephen Matsuda was standing now too. I'd like to know the same thing. The room was fracturing, conversations erupting at different tables. Aunt Clara looked stricken. Uncle Tom was on his feet, demanding to know what was happening. Brianna was crying. Colin pointed at me, his face twisted with fury. You selfish bitch. You're ruining my rehearsal dinner because you're jealous. Mr. Varga, James said, his voice cutting through the chaos like a blade. I'd advise you not to speak to my client. Anything you say here can and will be used in discovery. Stephanie grabbed my father's arm. Robert, we should go. We should call our lawyer. We don't need a lawyer. My father's composure was completely gone now. This is Clara, Tom, you know me. You know I wouldn't. Alina's confused. She's been listening to. I'm not confused, I said again. I looked at him, really looked at him. This man who'd taught me to ride a bike, who'd held my hand at my mother's funeral, who told me he was proud of me while systematically erasing me from the company she built. You made your choice, I said. When you forged board minutes, when you paid yourself through Stephanie's company, when you lied to me about the valuation. You chose money over me, over honoring mom and grandma, so now I'm making mine. You ungrateful. He stopped himself, but the words hung in the air anyway. James pulled a business card from his pocket, placed it on the table. Mr. Varga, have your attorney contact me. Ms. Varga will not be signing anything tonight, or ever unless it's on her terms. He turned slightly. Dr. Aucaffer, Mr. Matsuda, you'll be receiving full documentation tonight, including forensic accounting reports. As board members, you'll want to review them carefully. We'll be requesting an emergency board meeting within the next 72 hours. Patricia nodded slowly, her face grim. I turned to Colin and Brianna. I'm sorry, I said, and I meant it. I'm sorry your rehearsal dinner is ruined. I didn't want to do this here, but he didn't give me another choice. Brianna was sobbing into her napkin. Colin looked like he wanted to leap across the table and strangle me. You're dead to me, he said. The words landed like a physical blow. I nodded, okay. I picked up my purse. James offered me his arm. Together, we walked toward the exit. Behind us, the room exploded into noise. Shouting, crying, everyone talking at once. I didn't look back. We walked through the restored hallway, past the original crown molding I'd fought to preserve, past the windows I'd insisted on enlarging, past the history I'd saved and would never get credit for. James opened the door for me. The evening air was cool. I could hear the water lapping against the harbor wall. I made it to his car before I started shaking. He opened the passenger door, helped me in, then walked around and got in the driver's seat. He didn't start the engine, just sat there while I fell apart. I cried for 10 minutes, huge, gasping sobs that shook my whole body. When I finally stopped, James handed me a tissue from the console. You did it, he said quietly. The hardest part is over. I laughed, broken, bitter. That was the hardest part. He amended. The hardest emotional part, the legal part we're going to win. At what cost? He didn't answer, because there was no good answer. I'd just blown up my family in front of 60 witnesses. My brother hated me. My father would never forgive me. Brianna's wedding was probably going to be the most awkward event in history. But I'd kept my shares. I'd exposed the truth. I'd honored my mother and grandmother. I pulled out my phone, opened the photos, found the one I'd saved. My grandmother and my mother, 1982, standing in front of that first building. both of them grinning, arms around each other, looking so young and so fierce. "I hope I made you proud," I whispered. James started the engine. "Where to?" he asked. "Anywhere but here." He drove. I watched the city lights blur past the window and tried to figure out how to breathe in this new world I'd just created. Behind us, at the Harborview estate, my old life was burning to the ground. Ahead of us, somewhere in the dark, was whatever came next. James drove me to Tasha's apartment. She was waiting up, even though it was past 11. She took one look at me and pulled me into a hug. "How bad?" she asked. I told my brother I was sorry for ruining his rehearsal dinner, and he told me I'm dead to him. My voice sounded hollow. "So, pretty bad." She steered me to the couch, put a glass of wine in my hand, and sat beside me while I recounted the whole thing. James stayed for a few minutes to confirm logistics. The board packets had been delivered to Dr. Acaffer's and Stephen Matsuda's hotel rooms. The lawsuit was filed. The injunction was in effect, and then left, promising to call in the morning. I didn't sleep. I kept replaying it. My father's face, Colin's fury, Brianna sobbing. The way the room had fractured, everyone shouting at once, the careful social choreography of a rehearsal dinner exploding into chaos. My phone buzzed incessantly until I turned it off. Texts, calls, voicemails. I didn't want to know. Tasha made me eat toast at 2 in the morning, then sat with me until the sky started getting light. "You did the right thing," she said quietly. "Then why does it feel like this?" "Because doing the right thing and doing the easy thing are almost never the same thing." The emergency board meeting was scheduled for Monday afternoon, 72 hours after formal notice, exactly as the bylaws required. James had rented a conference room at a downtown hotel, neutral territory. Dr. Acaffer and Stephen Matsuda arrived first, both carrying the binders we'd sent. Their expressions were grim. My father arrived with his attorney, a silver-haired man named Douglas Hamer from one of the big downtown firms, the kind that billed $800 an hour. Colin was with them, looking like he hadn't slept either. We sat on opposite sides of the table. My father wouldn't look at me. James presented the evidence methodically. The forensic accounting report, the shell company payments, the falsified valuation, the undisclosed Castellan sale, the personal expenses run through the company. Dr. Acaffer's face grew harder with every page she turned. Stephen Matsuda kept making notes, his mouth pressed into a thin line. Douglas Hamer tried to argue that this was a family dispute being weaponized through litigation, that the consulting fees were legitimate, that the valuation was one professional opinion among many. James calmly produced 3 independent valuations we'd commissioned, all putting the company between $20 and $24 million. "Your client told his daughter the company was worth $8 million, James said, then tried to pressure her into selling her shares for $3.2 million, 30 days before closing a sale for $22 million. That's not a difference of professional opinion. That's fraud." "I was trying to protect her," my father said suddenly. His voice was raw. "The Castellan deal, it's complicated. There are contingencies, risks I didn't want her burdened with." "You didn't tell her at all," Dr. Acaffer said. Her voice was sharp. "Robert, I've known you for 20 years. I knew Maria, I knew Anna, and I'm telling you right now, this is indefensible." "Patricia, you paid yourself through your wife's company. You lied about the company's value to your own daughter. You were about to sell the company Anna and Maria built without even telling Alina." She closed the binder. "I'm calling for a vote of no confidence." "You can't," Colin started. "I absolutely can," Patricia said, "and I am." Stephen nodded. "I second the motion." Douglas Hamer tried to argue procedure, but James had the bylaws highlighted and ready. The vote was called. Dr. Acaffer, in favor of removing Robert as CEO. Stephen Matsuda, in favor. My father and Colin, opposed, obviously. And me, the 5th vote. Everyone looked at me. My father met my eyes for the first time since the rehearsal dinner. I saw something there, pleading, maybe, or anger, or grief. I couldn't tell anymore. In favor, I said quietly. 3-2, he was out. The board appointed an interim independent management company while we sorted through the legal mess. My father was required to relinquish access to company accounts, files, everything. He stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. I hope you're happy, he said to me, not loud, almost a whisper. Your mother would be ashamed of you. The words hit like a bullet. But I'd been expecting them. I'd armed myself against them. My mother built this company, I said, and you erased her from it. So no, Dad, I think she'd be ashamed of you. He left. Douglas, Hamer, and Colin followed. In the silence after they were gone, I realized I was shaking. Dr. Ackefer reached across the table and took my hand. You did the right thing, she said. Maria would be proud. The next 6 months were brutal. My father hired 3 different law firms before settling on Douglas Hamer's. They fought everything: the forensic report, the injunction, the vote. They filed motions to dismiss, motions to compel, motions to delay. James fought back harder. We went through discovery. Boxes and boxes of documents, emails, bank records, depositions that lasted days. I was deposed by Douglas Hamer. He tried to paint me as vindictive, estranged, incompetent. Asked pointed questions about my romantic relationship with James. There wasn't one yet, but Hamer tried to imply impropriety. Asked why I'd abandoned the company years ago if I cared so much. I sat in that conference room for 8 hours and answered every question calmly, precisely. James had prepped me well. When Hamer asked, "Isn't it true that you're doing this because you're jealous of your brother's success?" I looked him in the eye and said, "No, I'm doing this because my father committed fraud." My father was deposed next. James took him apart piece by piece, asked about the consulting fees, the Castellan sale, the falsified valuation, asked him to explain specific emails where he'd told Colin to keep Alina out of this and to handle her. My father's answers were defensive, rambling. He contradicted himself, got angry. The court-appointed forensic accountant, separate from Dr. Tanaka, completely independent, issued her report. It confirmed everything we'd found: fraud, self-dealing, breach of fiduciary duty. The case against my father was ironclad. Douglas Hamer recommended settlement. We met in a mediator's office in March, 7 months after the rehearsal dinner. The terms were harsh but fair. Robert and Colin would sell their combined 60% stake. I'd brought in a consortium of investors, including Dr. Ackefer, who wanted to stay involved, and a women-focused real estate investment group that loved the story of reclaiming the matriarchal legacy. The buyout price was based on the real valuation, $23 million. Robert and Colin's 60% was worth $13.8 million. Minus the amount they'd stolen through the shell company and personal expenses, $680,000, minus legal fees and damages. They walked away with about $12 million split between them. I kept my 40% and bought an additional 11% from the new investors, giving me 51%, controlling interest. The consortium took the remaining 49% as passive investors. I became CEO. Robert and Colin signed non-compete agreements. They couldn't work in commercial real estate in the state for 5 years. Stephanie's shell company was referred to the IRS for investigation. I didn't follow that too closely, but I heard she ended up paying significant penalties. The Castellan sale was dead. They'd backed out when the lawsuit became public and the company's ownership was in flux. But 6 months later, after I took over, they reached back out. We renegotiated. I got them to $26 million. We sold 8 of the 12 properties, the ones that made financial sense to liquidate, and kept the 4 crown jewels, including the Harborview estate. My shares, after the partial sale, were worth about $11 million. Plus, I was CEO of a leaner, cleaner company with 4 spectacular properties and 3 development sites. My father tried to reach out once. It was an email, Sent at 2 in the morning about a month after the settlement closed. Subject line, "Can we talk?" Body, "Alina, I know you're angry, I know I made mistakes, but you're still my daughter. Can we please talk? I miss you. Dad." I stared at that email for an hour. He didn't apologize, didn't admit what he'd done, just mistakes, passive and vague. And the plea was for himself. He missed me, he wanted to talk, not about what I needed or felt. I wanted him to say, "I'm sorry, I lied to you, I tried to cheat you. I erased your mother and grandmother. I chose money over you and that was wrong." But he'd never say that, because he'd never believe it. I closed the email without responding. Tasha asked me later if I regretted it. "No," I said. "The father I wanted, the one who'd actually apologize, who'd see what he did, he doesn't exist. Maybe he never did, and I can't keep lighting myself on fire to warm a ghost." 1 year and 4 months after the rehearsal dinner, I'm sitting in my office. Not an office, my office, the CEO office. I've redecorated. The walls that used to hold my father's framed magazine covers and awards now hold my mother's original architectural drawings, matted and preserved. There's a photo on my desk. My grandmother and my mother in 1982, standing in front of that first building, arms around each other, grinning like they'd just conquered the world. Because they had. The company is thriving. We're operating in the black for the first time in 3 years. Turns out when you're not siphoning off funds to shell companies, the margins improve. I've rebuilt relationships with long-term tenants, modernized our management systems, started a green building initiative to retrofit our properties with sustainable systems. I renamed the company. It's called Varga and Daughter Holdings now. The rebrand launched last month. The logo is simple, a line drawing of a building with a skylight, a nod to my mother's architectural signature. The website has a history page that tells the true story. Founded in 1982 by Maria Varga and Anna Varga, Varga and Daughter Holdings is a women-led commercial real estate company specializing in historical preservation and sustainable development. My mother and grandmother are finally back where they belong, at the center of the story. I'm also, unexpectedly, dadding James. It started professional, absolutely professional for the first 8 months. But after the settlement closed, after the dust settled, he asked me to dinner. Not a business dinner, just dinner. I said yes. He's patient, kind. He listens when I talk about the business, but he doesn't try to manage it for me. He thinks my success is attractive, not threatening. He knew me at my lowest and didn't try to fix me, just stood beside me while I fixed it myself. We're taking it slow. I'm taking everything slow these days, learning to trust again, learning that not everyone who says they love me is trying to take something from me. I'm in therapy, twice a month, working through the family trauma, the grief, the complicated knot of anger and loss and liberation. My therapist says I'm doing well. I don't always feel like I am, but I'm trying. I also started something new. A mentorship program for young women in real estate. It's run through the company, funded by our profits. We bring in college students and recent grads, teach them the business, pay them actual wages for internships, connect them with financing and networks. Last month, one of our mentees, a 23-year-old named Aisha who wants to focus on affordable housing development, told me I'd changed her life. I thought about my mother taking me to construction sites when I was 7. My grandmother teaching me to read a balance sheet at the kitchen table. "You'll do the same for someone else," I told Aisha. "That's how it works." I got a letter 2 months ago. It was from Colin, handwritten, forwarded through James's office. He and Brianna had divorced. She'd left him about 6 months after the wedding. Apparently finding out your husband and father-in-law are frauds is bad for marital bliss. Colin had burned through most of his settlement money on a series of bad investments and an expensive divorce. The letter was rambling, part apology, part justification, part plea. "I know you're probably still angry," he wrote, "and maybe you have a right to be, but we're still family. I've been thinking about everything that happened, and I wonder if there's a place for me at the company. I could start at the bottom, prove myself. I've learned a lot. I'm different now. Please, Alina, give me a chance. I read it 3 times. I thought about it for 2 weeks. And then I wrote back. Colin, I appreciate you reaching out. I hope you're getting the help you need, and I genuinely hope you figure out who you are without Dad shaping you. But no, there's no place for you in this company. Not because I'm punishing you, but because I don't trust you. Trust is earned, and you haven't earned it. I wish you well, but we're done. Alina. I sent it and felt nothing but relief. Boundaries, my therapist says, aren't walls, they're doors, and I get to decide who I let through. Colin doesn't get through, neither does my father or Stephanie. But Aunt Clara does. She reached out 6 months ago, apologized for not speaking up sooner, said she believed me and was proud of me. We have coffee once a month now. Uncle Tom does. He told me my mother would be proud. He comes to the office sometimes, looks at her drawings, tells me stories about when they were kids. Dr. Ackefer does. She's on my board and she's become a true mentor, a chosen grandmother in a way. Tasha does, always. And James does. And slowly, carefully, I'm building a family that doesn't bleed me dry. A family that's built on respect and honesty instead of obligation and manipulation. If you're listening to this, and if you've made it this far, thank you. I want to tell you something. If you're in a situation where someone is pressuring you to sign something, to give up something, to accept less than you deserve because it's easier, or it's what family does, or you don't really understand, stop. Just stop. Read what you're signing, every word. Get a lawyer, not the family lawyer, your own lawyer. Ask questions, demand answers. You are entitled to information. If you're a shareholder, a beneficiary, an heir, a partner, you have legal rights. Use them. And if people get angry at you for asking questions, for protecting yourself, for demanding honesty, that tells you everything you need to know. Family is supposed to protect you, not exploit you. Love is supposed to build you up, not tear you down. And anyone who tells you that setting boundaries makes you selfish or ungrateful or difficult, they're telling you that your compliance is more important to them than your well-being. Don't believe them. I spent years making myself smaller, quieter, easier. I told myself it was kindness. It was actually cowardice. And it cost me years of my life and almost cost me my inheritance. The night I stood up in that rehearsal dinner, I was terrified. I knew I was burning my family to the ground. And I did it anyway because the alternative, spending the rest of my life knowing I'd let them steal from me, let them erase my mother and grandmother, let them win, was worse than the fear. It's been a year and a half. I still don't talk to my father or my brother. Some people think that makes me cold, unforgiving, bitter. I think it makes me free. I honored my mother and grandmother by fighting for what they built. I honored myself by refusing to be erased. And every morning when I come into this office and I see their faces on the wall, I know I made the right choice. I want to hear from you. Where are you listening from right now? Are you at home, on a commute, folding laundry, walking the dog? Drop a comment and let me know. I love knowing where this story is landing. And if you've ever had to choose between keeping the peace and protecting yourself, if you've ever had to set a boundary that cost you a relationship, I want to hear about it. You're not alone. I know how much it costs. I also know how much you gain. If this story resonated with you, hit that like button. Smash the hype button if you're feeling it. Subscribe if you want more stories about women who refuse to stay small. And if you know someone who needs to hear this, someone who's being pressured, manipulated, told they're wrong for asking questions, share it with them. Sometimes we need permission to fight back. Consider this that permission. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. Thank you for witnessing this with me. Next week, I'm going to read some of your stories, because I know so many of you have fought your own battles, set your own boundaries, reclaimed your own power. And those stories deserve to be heard too. Until then, I'm Alina Varga, CEO of Varga and Daughter Holdings, and I'm not going anywhere. I close my laptop and look out the window. The city is spread below me, afternoon light turning the buildings gold. Somewhere out there is the first property my mother and grandmother ever bought, the one where this all started. I think about them constantly, wonder what they'd think of me now, wonder if they'd approve of how I fought, what I sacrificed, who I became. My phone buzzes, a text from James, "Dinner tonight, I'll cook." I smile and text back, "Yes, see you at 7. Then I turn back to my desk. There's a development proposal to review, a tenant meeting at 3, a call with the green building consultants at 4. The work continues, the legacy continues. And for the first time in my life, I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. Not because someone handed it to me. Not because I made myself small enough to fit into someone else's vision. But because I fought for it, because I refused to disappear, because I honored the women who came before me by becoming the woman they raised me to be. Strong, competent, uncompromising. My mother's daughter, my grandmother's granddaughter. Myself. I open the development proposal and get back to work. Outside my window, the light shifts, the city breathes, the world keeps turning. And I'm still here, standing in the center of what my mother and grandmother built, making sure their names are never erased again. This is my inheritance, and I'm never letting it go.